Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello and welcome to the webinar that is in the world of fake news. Why is real communication needed more than ever? My name is Gabrielle Dolan and I specialise in real communication and business storytelling. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about a little bit about fake news and real communication and what hinders real communication and the consequences and what we can do to achieve real communication more effectively. So the rise of fake news, fake news and alternative facts is probably something we didn't talk about even maybe 2 or so years ago, but it seemed to have entered the vocab very quickly. You may know that it sort of came up after Donald Trump's US presidential inauguration in 2017 when his press secretary, Sean Spicer, at the time stated that it was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration. The backlash was pretty swift, as you could imagine, with images popping up all over the media comparing Barack Obama's crowd side by side with Trump's. And the fact that it showed that the images of the crowd, the streets of Washington, were far larger for Obama than they were for Trump. But it was after making this statement that Spicer told the media that he would be honest with the American people, but also stated that the White House may sometimes disagree with facts. So you may recall that very same day, the US Chancellor to the President, Kellyanne Conway, was interviewed on Meet the Press. And when she was asked to defend Sean Spicer's false statements about the attendance. And when challenged on why he would say something that was so provably false, Conway replied that Spicer was giving alternative facts. Her choice of words was widely mocked on social media and criticised by journalists, and it was described as a George Orwell phrase, which even helped increase sales of George Orwell's 1984 book and pushing it to #1 on Amazon's bestseller and forcing a reprint of 75,000. So Conway later defended the phrase, defining alternative facts as additional facts and alternative information. But there is no doubt since that day and since those comments that fake news and alternative facts has really dominated the landscape. Now, of course, there's nothing new about fake news. Cases have been recorded as far back as the 1st century when I read a story when Octavian apparently ran a fake news campaign against his rival Mark Antony, which invoked outrage from the Roman people, who they were already unhappy with Mark Antony because after marrying Cleopatra, after divorcing Octavian's sister, and appointing Cleopatra ruler of Egypt and Cyprus and Crete and Syria. So after Mark Antony was defeated by Octavian in battle, Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt. So she actually spread fake news of her own suicide. The story goes, however, that she forgot to tell her husband, Mark Antony, which is a pretty major oversight, which some historians argue was deliberate. But he thought she was really dead, so he committed suicide himself. So, look, today fake news is on the rise, and with an ever-increasing amount of technology where fake videos and audio can be created, the capability and accessibility of this technology means it is very easy for anyone with a bit of technical know-how to create fake news. And fake news is actually having a really significant impact on who we trust and what we trust. Edelman, a global communications marketing firm, conduct an annual global study to determine levels of trust. And the last few years, they have shown that trust has become a real issue. The 2018 results revealed that we are in a battle for truth, that we don't know who to trust and we don't know what to trust. The report showed that 63% agreed that the average person does not know how to tell good journalism from fake news. And like I said before, fake news is so easily, able to be developed that we actually don't know the difference between good journalism and fake news. The report also showed that 42% say that they do not know which companies or brands to trust, which is, it's quite disturbing when you see figures like that 42% of us don't know which companies and brands to trust. And once lost, trust is very hard to earn back. Now, this is true for both an individual and a company level. When trust is lost, customers and potential customers will look elsewhere. In 2018, so last year, Deloitte, the global service company Deloitte, conducted research into the Australian financial institution in the financial industry. I'm based in Australia and we've been going through some royal commissions into the banking industry, and they surveyed over 2,000 Australian consumers. And the insights in this report showed that the trust in the Australian financial service industry had taken a dive. The report said that 32% of customers, so almost a third of customers, said their trust in the finance industry had deteriorated in the previous 12 months. 47%, so almost half of the customers, did not trust their own financial service provider. So nearly half the customers are not trusting the banks that have all their money. And to really show the extent of distrust, 23% of those surveyed said they would consider switching their financial services to companies like Qantas and Virgin. So Qantas and Virgin have started to offer financial services, and 23% have said they would consider changing. So I think this insight, I believe, shows not only how far the finance industry has fallen in the eyes of its customers, but also how important trust is. We have lost so much faith in the traditional finance industry that we are considering having our financial services needs met by airline carriers. When we lose trust in companies or industries, we naturally, as humans, we naturally seek what they offer elsewhere. And even if what we seek is not that organisation's main area of expertise. But I trust Qantas. I fly Qantas all the time, and I trust Qantas with my life every time I fly with them. So it's really not too much of a stretch to trust them with my superannuation and my savings. So this is a real danger for traditional finance companies as new players enter the market and provide more choices for customers. And it's just not the finance industry that are being affected by this lack of trust. As Sean Pilot de Troncier says in his 2018 book, The Post-Truth Business, if a brand isn't trustworthy, when choice is available, it will be rejected in favour of one that is. So this one becomes, when customers don't have a choice, maybe trust isn't so much of an issue, but when they have a choice, when choice is available, it'll be rejected in favour of one that is. So companies need to be more aware that along with losing business to their competitors due to a lack of trust, they can also lose business to other industries. Now, there is no denying we are now operating in an environment that is more cynical, and with fake news being so common, we don't know, again, I said before, we don't know what to trust and we don't know whom to trust. Now, as individual leaders, we need to be aware of this and also understand that this is why your people, your employees, your team, your customers are wanting real communication more than ever. So I want to spend some time looking at what helps and what hinders real communication. When it comes to communication, and one of the things I'm going to look at is what hinders communication. And when it comes to communication, corporate jargon has a real impact a significant impact on our ability to communicate in a way that's real. Jargon's sort of all around us. We use jargon, it's the default language of business. You probably, every industry has their own jargon, every company has their own jargon. You're probably, we're all guilty of using jargon. But I want to look at why we use jargon. So we do use jargon for different reasons, and I want to look at probably the 3 reasons I see that we use jargon. And it really, jargon can really disconnect and isolate people. So why do we do it? And one of the things is, the first reason is avoidance. So we use jargon to avoid saying what we really mean, to hide behind the truth. Politicians use jargon a lot to actually avoid answering questions. And business people use it normally to not talk about what the real issue is, the real communication. You see this a lot when companies are announcing changes that result in job losses, for example. They'll talk about realignment. They'll use any word except job losses. In my latest book, I cite a really recent example, and it literally came from General Motors just earlier this year. So right at the end of last year, General Motors, they just took this to a whole new level when they referred to the closure of 5 plants in the United States and Canada with a loss of up to 14,000 jobs as being unallocated. So instead of saying job losses, they said unallocated. The CEO, Mary Barra, used the term 3 times when speaking to market analysts, including this statement, which I find is just jargon at its best to avoid. Market conditions require that 5 North American assembly and propulsion plants will be unallocated by the end of 2009. So, this is when we're using jargon. We're using words like unallocated instead of job losses. I think one of the other reasons we use jargon is to sound more important than what we actually are. So we try to sound impressive. We try to use big words and make us sound more intelligent than what we are. You don't need to look any further than job titles. Job titles are a classic way of us using jargon and big words to sound more important than what we are. There's a couple that I love. There's one called the Dean of Pizza at Pizza Hut, and his role is to require training Pizza Hut managers on how to properly cut pizzas and place them in the boxes. The director of sound design at Facebook is apparently responsible for creating all the, the pop, the ding, all the sound effects you hear when you receive notification on your Facebook feed. So we use jargon to sound important, and you just look through LinkedIn and see the various job titles that make us all sound very important. Everyone's a chief of something or a vice president of something else. But I think one of the main reasons we use jargon, the absolutely main reason we use jargon, is acceptance. So as humans, one of our greatest desires is to feel connected and to feel accepted by other people. So we start copying, you get into a new job and you almost, to blend in and to be accepted, you dress the way everyone's dressing, you act the way everyone else is acting, and you actually start speaking the way everyone else is speaking. You may have experienced this before. When you start a new job, everyone will be using some jargon, and you may ask what it means, but then very quickly you just start to use it to fit in. All it takes is, a CEO or a senior executive to use the latest jargon word, like pivot, and everyone starts to pivot. Everyone starts using pivot. Customer-centric strategy. We all start using customer-centric strategy. So acceptance is important, and that's a big reason I believe we use jargon. And so, there's all valid reasons to use jargon, but there's actually some really big consequences that we need to be aware of when we're using jargon. Disconnects and isolates people. So every time we're using jargon, we're potentially, we're potentially disconnecting people, we're potentially isolating them, and a lot of the times we're just plain annoying them. So Richard Branson once said, why do people use jargon when most people find it really annoying? And he's one of the leaders that actually really tries to not use jargon. Elon Musk is another one that tries to not use jargon and encourages his people not to use jargon. But the consequences, so there's some really pretty severe consequences around how we can communicate, and using jargon really impacts on real communication. One of the other things, and it's really closely related to jargon, is acronyms. So acronyms can have a significant impact on the way we communicate. The problems with acronyms is for every acronym there's another meaning. So any acronym you think of, there will be alternate meanings to that acronym, depending on perhaps what industry you work in or what company you work in. There will be different meanings. So, for example, if I say the acronym SME to you, a lot of you will be thinking small to medium enterprise, and others will be thinking subject matter expert. I remember having a conversation with someone for about 10 minutes and wondering why we weren't really connecting with each other, and I sort of felt the conversation wasn't even making sense. And after about 10 minutes, I sort of said to her, when you say SME, do you mean subject matter expert, or do you mean small to medium enterprise? And she was talking about small to medium enterprises, and I was talking about subject matter experts. So no wonder the conversation did not make sense. Other examples are STI. Now, some of you might be laughing at this, but when I spent my entire corporate life, and whenever I saw the acronym STI, to me it meant short-term incentives. But to a lot of people now, it's sexually transmitted infections, and that can be a really, really awkward conversation if you're asking someone about what STIs they have and you're meaning short-term incentives, and they're taking it a completely different way. One more quick other example, and this happened to me recently, is BPS. So I got an email from my financial planner, and in it had something about my portfolio. It had 50 BPS. Now, I'm from a technology background, so I immediately saw BPS and thought it was bits per second. But I knew it wasn't, but I wasn't actually sure what it was. So I sent her an email back and asked her what BPS meant, and she said it's basis points. Now, as soon as she said that, I thought, yes, of course it is, because we're talking about financial matters. But the danger with that is, not only did it take 2 emails to clarify it, which it actually, made communication slower, but it made me feel a little bit like an idiot for not knowing. And I'm the customer. So the real danger with acronyms is when we start using acronyms with our customers and clients, because it can actually make them feel a little bit silly for not knowing, and we should never make that feel for our customers feel that way. So as long as everyone understands what it means, then it can become a really efficient way to communicate, but only if everyone understands what it means. When I was doing some research for my book around acronyms, I discovered that the word acronym originated during World War II. So the word acronym wasn't even really a word till 1943. I think it entered the dictionary. So it originated in World War II to make it harder for the enemy to understand messages. So because the English was so worried about the enemy tapping into their messages, they started to use acronyms to make it harder for people to understand. So it's quite ironic, isn't it, that when we're communicating, we're using acronyms that were actually invented to make communication harder, and we're using it believing it's a more efficient way to communicate. And the vast majority of times, it's not an efficient way to communicate, and people think we're hiding things, which is really dangerous when we're in this world of distrust. The other thing I think it puts all the onus on the listener. So using acronyms can actually be quite lazy, because we're asking the listener to do all the interpretation and interpret what the acronym is. So as I said before, if everyone understands the acronym, if everyone understands the piece of jargon, then it can help and it can be really efficient. But in most cases, using acronyms and using jargon actually hinders effective communication, which is critical in this time of distrust and, you know, fake news and everything. We need to be able to speak in a way that's more real. So that's what hinders real communication. Let's look at what helps real communication. And one of the things, and I guess it's still on acronyms a bit, is to actually reduce the excessive, unnecessary use of acronyms. Now, I know I've made an acronym there, but I'm being ironic reducing that to an acronym. So this excessive, unnecessary use of acronyms, if we just reduce this, there seems to be a default that we have to reduce everything to an acronym, and the reality is we don't. And this is coming out of academia. And if you're writing a 160,000 word report, then I understand why we could use acronyms. But if you're writing a 4-page report or you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, that you don't need to reduce everything to an acronym. And even when you're speaking, sometimes it's just easier to say the whole word instead of reducing it to an acronym. It actually doesn't save. You might think you're saving time, but it's not helping with real communication. I had a client of mine who moved into a new role, into a new company and a new industry, and she was just bombarded with new acronyms and jargon. She led a team, and she got this report from her team, and it was a 10-page report, and it was actually a 9-page report, but the final page was a list of all the acronyms. And she felt it was really frustrating to read this report because she had to keep referring back to the last page and refer to the acronym. So in a way to change the culture in her company, she actually asked her team to rewrite the report, removing all the acronyms and just writing out the full words. And then, they could remove the last page because there was no need for the glossary of terms. And guess how long the report was? It was still 10 pages. So it wasn't saving any paper. It wasn't saving any writing. It was actually just making it a lot easier for the reader to understand what was being said, which again helps real communication. The other thing that helps real communication is avoiding jargon and cliches and tired metaphors. So not only using jargon words, but using these, cliches like, time is money and low-hanging fruit and all these metaphors that can actually hinder real communication. Sometimes metaphors can work. So a metaphor can work and it can be really effective. But again, when we're in this environment of distrust, sometimes people feel that when we're just using cliches and we're using metaphors, we're actually hiding behind what we really want to say. And so one of the things that helps real communication is to use real words. So when I say real words, I'm not saying metaphors and cliches aren't real words, but use words that people connect and engage with. One of the other things, and it's one of the things I teach leaders a lot about, is the use of stories. And so one of the things that can really help people understand your message and help you communicate in a way that's really genuine, that helps you come across in a way that's really personal and helps you come across in a way that, you know, people feel they can trust you and respect you, and that is to use stories. I said before, I do a lot of work. My main work is teaching business leaders how to share stories to communicate their messages better. And over the last 15 years of been doing this, I've realised that there's perhaps 4 types of stories that you can use in business to get your message across. And so I just thought it might be useful to take you through this. And one of the stories, one of the most basic stories you can use are parables. You know, so this is Aesop's fables, or, you know, parables about the boy who cried wolf. They're pretty safe. If you've never used stories before, they're a pretty safe way to start using stories. Another type of story are the public stories. So these are, when I mean public, you could Google them. You're going to find all the information on Google. Again, a lot of people use these public stories. They share stories about Nelson Mandela, or they share stories about Steve Jobs, or they share stories about, you know, their football teams, or, you know, someone winning premierships, or, you know, the English soccer team, or Manchester United, and they share these stories that are out there in the public, and they still may get their message across, but what they don't do is they don't tell me anything about you as the person. So I'm not getting to know you anymore, and I'm not getting to know more about you. The other type of story that people often share that can become really effective to communicate in a way that's more genuine is to share professional stories. So these are stories from your work life. So what you've done in the past, the jobs you've done, the challenges you've had, when something's gone wrong at work and what you've done. These are actually, you know, they can be quite, you know, you've got first-hand experience of them, and they can be really useful. Told well, they can be quite emotional. Told in a reporter fashion, they can feel a little bit like a case study, but there's still stories that you can use to communicate in a way that's more genuine and more real. The other type of story, so the final or the 4th type of story that I think is really valuable when you're communicating, is your personal stories. I think your personal stories can be the most powerful story that you share. Personal stories are stories, you know, they could be about something that's happened to you in your childhood. They could be something that's happened with your kids. It's literally something from your personal life, but you can use it to get your business message across. I believe that your personal power, your personal stories, and some of your professional stories can be the most powerful ways you can communicate, not only to get your message across, but also to share with your audience a bit about you. So some of your values you have, some of your traits, some of your behavior, so your audience gets to know a little bit more about you. What I find is the professional and public stories, these are actually quite literal stories. So if you need to share a story about the importance of risk management, for example, your professional or public stories will be very much related to risk management. Perhaps your professional story would be when you were in a risk management role and what you did. The personal and parable stories are actually quite lateral. And so what I mean by that is, on the surface, they may not seem related to the message, but then right at the end, you talk about how it is related to the message. The public and parable stories are secondhand, which means you weren't involved in those. But, you know, like I said, you can Google them, you can find out information. And because you weren't involved, they tend not to show me much information about you. But the professional and the personal stories, you have first-hand experience. You were involved in them. These are your stories that you can share. It might be useful at this stage, because I am talking about the personal stories being the most powerful, is to just share an example with you of what I mean by that. So I had a client, and I was talking about risk management before, and she was a risk manager, and she worked in a company, and she had all these business units that she used to support. And she said that the biggest problem she had when she was talking about risk management with the people that she was working with is that every time risk was raised in a meeting, they all looked at her and they said, well, risk is your job. And she always would try to explain to them that risk is not her job. It's actually their job to manage risk. And all she could do as a risk manager was to give them, you know, the knowledge and the support and the information to help them manage their own risk. And she told me that no matter how many times she said that, the message didn't get through, the behavior didn't change. So during one of my workshops, she developed this story that she started to use with the business units she supported. So she said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but Mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do if we ever came across a spider in the timber heap, and we knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this really hot day, Mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the front gate. So I ran down the path, and then I just froze, because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything Mum taught us to do. So I played statues, and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell Mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, the knowledge, and the advice. So regardless, so when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. Now, Rosemary shared with me that after she started to use that story with the business unit support, it not only helped them understand the role she played as risk manager, it helped them understand the role they needed to play. And she said it was actually quite funny because at the end of the meeting, they would talk about, have we identified our copperhead snakes, which was code for have we identified all the risk. So what that story did for her, it did for Rosemary, is it helped her get her message across, but she used a personal story to do it. And, you know, and in hearing that story, you get to know a little bit more about Rosemary. And every time we share a personal story, people get to know us a little bit more. And what that does, what I know that does, it not only fast tracks trust, but it strengthens relationship. And I think personal stories will become one of your strongest skills and strongest tools you can use to communicate more effectively, more genuinely when we are in a world of high distrust due to a whole lot of reasons, but fake news and alternative facts being one of them. So that's the main thing I wanted to share with you, but and we did want to open it up for questions. But I think, and this is, if you are actually interested in storytelling, you can subscribe to my database and you receive a 7-day storytelling starter kit. So that will help you start to think about stories and how you could use them. And of course, you can see on the slide there how you can connect with me and let me know. But I think we now, and the book you can see right there in the middle, that is my latest book that was just actually released last week. So I'm very excited about that, and it's receiving some good reviews, which is always very pleasing, and more pleasing than not receiving bad reviews, which is no author ever wants to hear or get. So I believe we are going to have a bit of information about some training courses. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle, for delivering this excellent presentation. I want to inform you that PCB provides training and certification services for ISO 27032 Introduction, Foundation, and Lead Cybersecurity Manager. A PCB certificate in these above-mentioned courses will convey your dedication in implementing and managing these processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. Now, we will go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees regarding today's very interesting topic. So the first question is, what persuasive strategies make fake news seem to be true, and how can you spot them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the problem with fake news, it is very, very hard to spot. So there's technology around at the moment that, you know, you may have seen it, that it's audio, so it can mimic someone's voice. There's video that, you know, you can have someone talking and their mouth's moving, but it's not their words coming out. And the reality is, and this is happening all over the world, as genuine journalists get less and less, news agencies are looking for content and they're looking for it for free. So a lot of people can just send in, you know, videos that they've said they've you know, recorded, and they send it into newsrooms, and newsrooms, just because of their lack of resources, pick it up and spread it. So that's why fake news is really it's a real danger. And you know, we see how it can swing election campaigns. We saw it in the US elections, and it's happening now. So it is really hard to spot fake news, and that's why we are now in an environment with really low trust because of that. Well, that's one of the major reasons we're in it.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Another similar question actually is, how do you make the difference between fake news and good journalism?
Yes. Look, there's again, when you see good journalism, you can spot it. You can see it's very balanced. Good journalism will actually pick up on fake news. Good journalism will not allow fake news to go to air. But again, as people get more sophisticated, as journalists get more sophisticated, as people doing the fake news, you got to remember, people generating fake news are doing it for manipulation. They're trying to manipulate things, so they're becoming very sophisticated. But the very good journalists will, I think, will spot that and will pick it out. But again, it's very difficult.
Thank you. Another question is, what circumstances would make a fake news story more believable?
I think fake news stories become believable when they tap into what people want to believe. So this what happens with elections, where people want to believe something, and then someone runs fake news so they believe it more easily. You know, you got to, again, I'm going back to the US elections, but you see this all the time, and with all the Cambridge Analytics on Facebook, it's not only you can make up these stories that people want to believe, you can actually then, through all the analytics, send it and target the people that actually want to believe it. So if you're coming from a viewpoint that you think, you know, Barack Obama's an alien, and someone runs a fake news story that he's an alien, you're going to believe that. You're going to believe it more readily and more quickly, because it backs up your opinions, and that's when fake news can become really believable.
Thank you. Now to conclude the presentation, the last question for today's session, should we react to each fake news that concerns us?
Should we react to it? Was that
Should we react to each fake news that concerns us?
Part of me thinks it's sort of like trolls on social media, that you don't feed the trolls. So if there's fake news, and you know it's fake news, my personal opinion is that I don't engage in the conversation around fake news. What I do if someone is having a conversation, quoting fake news, it's your job. Well, it's not your job, but if you disagree with it, you need to challenge that, and you need to challenge the sources of where this fake news comes from. Because it's the more prevalent this fake news is, the more we go into a environment of distrust, which again, like I said, makes real communication and being able to communicate in a way that's real and genuine and authentic becomes more critical.
Thank you, Gabrielle, again for this outstanding and interactive presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please be informed that this session will be recorded and posted on our website as well as on our YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Also, I wanted to inform you that in 2 weeks' time we will organize our first special skill set oriented webinar. For more information, please visit our website www.pecb.com. Thank you all and have a great day.